Hello, Lakeview family. I hope all is well in your world. We are journeying through Advent. Last Sunday was the first Sunday of Advent where we wait, right? This idea of anticipation of the coming of Christ as a child at Christmas, as well as then thinking about the time in between, right? The already and not yet. So then anticipation of when Christ will come again. So for those of us who live in this time of after Christ has come, we use this time of waiting for Christmas to help us think about how we should live in this space in between. For us, we have to kind of work hard, right? Because all around us, everywhere, and in our minds, Christ has come as a child. And so the idea of waiting and anticipating the birth of Christ is difficult because we know that Christ has come. So by putting ourselves kind of back in those shoes of those who were alive at the time at or before Christ's coming, we look at and read scripture and try to find ourselves sitting in that space of anticipation and awaiting the coming of Christ. And that is certainly where we find ourselves on Sunday in the passage that we'll read, which is Isaiah 40, verses 1 through 11. And it's Isaiah prophetic literature is difficult to read and to grasp, and Isaiah is certainly probably top of the mark. Jeremiah is also difficult, but these passages in scriptures that deal with prophecy, that speak about God's judgment and what God is doing, and also speak about God's salvation and God's presence, and also speak about what God is doing and is going to do. It's hard, and in our minds, we want to try and find the clear path. This speaks of a way in the wilderness. Well, we want to find a way that is very clearly marked, and this passage speaks about it's Gene. I remember when we did the bike ride across the country, Gene quoted this all the time of the valleys being raised up and the hills being brought low, and smooth paths made in the wilderness, the rugged paths made plain. And he would talk about this as they were riding up and down and over and around. But that's what we want in terms of understanding and grasping the things of God. And all along we've talked about, and I've brought up continually, the mystery of God. And when we think about prophetic literature, when we think about eschatology or the understanding of the end times or what is coming, the things that even Jesus speaks about, there is this element of the reality that these are things that we do not fully know. We see through a glass dimly. And I think, however, in the midst of that, we can take heart and hope. And as Sunday's word, peace comes not in knowing the answers or grasping the truth or having it all figured out. Peace comes in the Comforter. Peace comes from where this verse starts. Remember, Isaiah 40 follows 39, which is hardcore judgment on Hezekiah. And this is right before then Babylonian rule begins. So when they come and the exile happens, then there's a pause in between 39 and 40. And we have to find ourselves in that pause. We have to allow that to be a break. I mean, even for Hezekiah, the last words of Hezekiah are he's at peace because he doesn't think this will be in his time. And so there is this pause and there's this break, and then 40 comes, and where God has been proclaiming and asking the prophet to speak judgment on a people who have sinned and walked away from God after warning after warning. What you also see is a God who says, and the language, the original language in this is plural, so it would seem to speak to the fact that he's speaking to kind of this heavenly chorus, and it's being overheard, recorded, or the prophet in this case is also kind of listening in on this dialogue, so noticing the language and what's happening. But there's this, God is speaking and saying, comfort my people. Recognizing what the people of Israel are coming through. They're in exile. Jerusalem has been destroyed. The temple has been destroyed. And God is speaking comfort. And then he says, speak tenderly, right? And then God also talks about the kind of their time has been filled. Penance has been made. They've served their time, it says. And then the grace is coming unmerited, but God's salvation then comes. And then you see the work that is happening through this passage and the comfort that is coming. And then you see the prophet is asked to then cry out to the people. And then, it's as if the prophet kind of throws up his hands and the words back, the only words attributed to a singular voice would be this of just the people are like grass. Like this is probably going to happen again. Like it's fleeting. Like what do we draw from this? What do I say? And then you get back to the end and this little section of this poem of these words in Isaiah 40 begin with comfort, and the words like comfort my people, and ends with this picture of then what that looks like in images of a shepherd that will feed the flock, that will guide those who are the mothers of the sheep. And you have this gentle shepherd imagery and language which is rich in scripture that embodies this idea of what comfort looks like. It's presence of the good shepherd, the one that has promised then to come. And buried in this passage is one that's tied directly to what we think about in Advent and the preparation of the coming of Christ, and the words that then John the Baptist uses about himself as a voice calling in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. So there's so much richness in this passage, so much to kind of unpack and flesh out. But the whole point and purpose for me, I think, in this text and what we see and what we hear is the reality of what, as we talk about peace, as we light the peace candle in this second week of Advent, as this focus is about peace, in a world where chaos reigns, in a world where in some ways we can relate with Isaiah 1 through 39 of just the speaking of judgment and the realities of brokenness in the world and the reign of sin and people choosing self and idolatry. Chaos is abounding in our day, and it can be overwhelming. But what we recognize and what we sit with in the season of Advent is the reality of what it means that Christ has indeed come. And language often used and appropriately used about Jesus the Messiah is the Prince of Peace. And it's this vision of, though what happened in Isaiah 1 through 39 is true, though punishment has come to the people of Israel, God has not abandoned God's people, and he comes and brings comfort, speaks comfort, demands and commands comfort for what he would say, my people. And for us, these messages continue to ring true, that the reality is that God has come and is coming again, and we recognize the peaceful reign of Jesus. And it's pulling back from the realities of this world and recognizing that God comes in the form of a shepherd. God comes in the form of the Prince of Peace to bring and abide with us in peace. So as we prepare for Sunday, as you're reading the Advent readings, I hope you're digging into those and enjoying those. I certainly am. Love that we have something like this created from our people. As we're continuing in this week until Sunday, it's sitting with this idea of hope. May our hearts be prepared for what we will be looking at and uncovering this next week as we think about peace. Blessings.